This Week in Virology, the podcast about viruses, the kind that make you sick. From Microbe TV, this is TWiV, This Week in Virology, episode 745, recorded on April 16, 2021. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you're listening to the podcast all about viruses. Joining me today from Ann Arbor, Michigan, Kathy Spindler.
Hi, everybody. Here it's 48 degrees, and it's partly cloudy, partly sunny, and that's Fahrenheit, and always takes me another second or two to get it in Celsius. It's 13 Celsius.
When I stepped outside this morning, I was shocked. It was cold again. It was just like 3 Celsius. Now it's 9. Yes. Oh, yes. My gosh. Did you send us this weather, Kathy?
I guess I did. I told Brianne yesterday we had snow for her virtual visit in Ann Arbor, but it didn't stick or anything.
Also joining us from Madison, New Jersey, Brianne Barker.
Hi. It's slightly warmer here. It's 52 Fahrenheit, but still very cloudy, 11 Celsius.
And from Western Massachusetts, Alan Dove.
Good to be here. It's snowing.
Oh, no.
I woke up this morning and there was snow on the ground. It's not sticking to the roads or anything, but there was snow on the ground. It's been alternately flurrying and raining all day. It's very unpleasant. 34 Fahrenheit, 1C, and just yuck outside.
Well, our guest today comes from where the weather is probably perfect. She is the Chief Conservation and Wildlife Health Officer for San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, Nadine Lamberski. Welcome to TWiV.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And it's actually quite cool in San Diego today. I'm north of San Diego in Escondido. It's a chilly 66 degrees Fahrenheit, but should get to 72 later in the day. My preferred optimum temperature is 78.
Nadine, I have to pronounce your name right, is well known to Kathy Spindler, right, Kathy?
Yes, so Nadine was my first lab undergraduate dishwasher. And some people have heard Rich talk about how you can get your start in science by just going into a lab and washing dishes. And so Nadine and I go way back. And then in the early 2000s, I think it was around 2006, I was reading one of my zoo newses. I have belonged to the San Diego Zoo ever since I was a graduate student there, which was starting in 1975. And so I still get the zoo news, and sometimes they pile up. And I was looking through one, and there was somebody all garbed up in PPE and not recognizable, but in the caption it said Nadine Lamberski was in on this surgery. And I said, there has to be only one Nadine Lamberski. And I contacted her, and then we were going out for a meeting. Lisa Gerlinsky, my former student, Lei Fang, was there at the Salk doing a postdoc, also a former student. And Nadine took us on a backstage tour of the labs and hospital of the Wild Animal Park, which was really great. And then she appeared in the news in January, as we'll discuss. And so I connected with her again.
Nice. So we have some history here in our podcast with zoos. We did a This Week in Parasitism at the Bronx Zoo, Nadine, quite a few years ago. We had, I forgot the guy's name. He's the director of all the zoos in New York City, apparently a friend of Daniel Griffin. And he'd had a penguin that had malaria because the birds have avian malaria in them and the penguins are susceptible to it. So we went there to film and talk about it. It was really cool. He brought us into the lab and so forth. So this is our second zoo episode on our podcast. So this experience in Kathy's lab was at the University of Michigan, right?
No, Georgia.
Georgia. Okay. And did you grow up in Georgia, Nadine?
No, I did not. I was born in Northern California. My dad was in the Air Force, so I was born on the Air Force Base. And then moved back with my family after a couple of years to New Jersey. I did
Yay.
My school education and all my relatives are, or at the time were in New Jersey. We, from an Eastern European family background, I believe I'm third generation American. And so most of my great grandparents and above that settled in the New Jersey area. Anyway, my family moved to Georgia in the late 70s, actually in 1979. And so I finished high school in Georgia, went to college, University of Georgia. I did went to vet school at University of Georgia, and then I did an internship at University of Tennessee, did my residency at UC Davis. Then I took my first job in Columbia, South Carolina, and then I was recruited back to California for San Diego Zoo.
And when you went to college, was it already in your mind to be a veterinarian?
It was in my mind, I think, since I was in the third grade. After I think I initially wanted to be a farmer, and then I was steered in a more lucrative direction by my parents. But those were the only two careers that I was exposed to that kind of included the environment and animals. And I have to say, I love my parents dearly, but they really didn't push the boundaries of science very much. They just kind of went with, oh yeah, you'll be a veterinarian. And that's what people who like animals work. So it wasn't, I didn't have a lot of other options presented to me. And then I actually was really fortunate in college to meet Kathy and experience a different world. And I almost didn't go to vet school. Actually, my gap year was the time I spent in Kathy's lab and learning more about bench sciences and just opened my eyes to a lot of things. But in the end, that connection to a living animal and that aspect of health and caring drew me back to veterinary medicine.
But you could, as a vet, you can do many things and you were drawn to the zoo, obviously, but that probably wasn't in your mind early on, right?
No, it actually wasn't in my mind at all until after I graduated. So I just assumed I would work with small animals and worked for a lot of veterinarians in high school and even throughout college and also during vet school. And then sorry to admit it, but I got a little burnt out on just working with individual pet animals. I wanted, I was young and idealistic, still am idealistic, not so young. And I just wanted to do something for the world. I wanted to have an impact. And I felt like I had to give back, do something on a grander scale. And so I wanted to work. I think I wrote an essay at some point in my life. I wanted to work with endangered species. So who gets to do that? I thought it would never happen. And 30 years later, that's exactly what I do.
So one thing I'm sort of curious about is when you were kind of starting to work at a zoo, how do you manage trying to know the biology of so many diverse animals? I can sort of imagine someone who's working on dogs and cats kind of specializing in the physiology and biology of dogs and cats. But it seems like at a zoo, you have to be an expert on a lot of different types of animals. And I wonder how you sort of manage all of that.
That's an interesting question. And I guess the answer is I'm not an expert on everything. And the way that I kind of parse everything out is based on their GI tracts. So, and the food we eat really makes us what we are, right? And your anatomy and physiology is based a lot on how and what you eat. And so, in vet school, we're not taught that. That was kind of an epiphany I had somewhere along my career. In vet school, we get cat, dog, cow, horse, chicken, and everything is really a combination of those basic body types. So there are carnivorous lizards, for example. There's herbivorous lizards. There are birds that have a GI tract similar to a rumen, like a cow. There's just an incredible diversity. But in the end, I go with the digestive tract to where that is important is in the drugs that you use. Where do they get absorbed? Where would they break down in the body? How important is rumination? And so you want to be careful with antibiotics in a foregut fermenter versus also with a hindgut fermenter. But for those species like carnivores that don't ferment, that you can, you can use a lot broader spectrum of antibiotics. So there's just different tricks to the business, I guess.
When you first went to the zoo, I guess it wasn't in your current position, right? So what was your first job there?
At San Diego Zoo, the Wild Animal Park. Yeah. I was recruited as a veterinarian, clinical veterinarian. I had been at Riverbanks for 7 years, and during that time, I took a leave of absence, and I filled in at San Diego Zoo when the director of vet services there went to China to work with giant panda and to train Chinese veterinarians on panda medicine. And so I was very fortunate to come and take his place in the clinic. And it was an extremely busy, fast-paced practice. I did and learned so many things in that brief period of time that I had in quite a few years at my other job. But I also thought the pace of work was insane and vowed to never work there. And I was asked to apply for some positions over time and never really had a strong interest. But then after working at Riverbank Zoo for probably 6-7 years, I had kind of learned what I was going to learn there and experienced what I was going to experience. And I started to get a little bit of wanderlust, being in that college and educational cycle where every 4 years you graduate and move on to do something different. I was there for 7. I was really restless, and I got a phone call and they said, would you interview for a position? And it was at the San Diego Zoo Wild Animal Park at the time. And I thought, wow, this is completely different. I don't really work with a lot of rhinos. I had, a couple rhinos at Riverbanks, a couple elephants, but not the number of hoofstock that the park has now or then. So I thought, what the heck? I could figure this out. So I ended up getting the position. I started as a senior veterinarian, and I worked with some really, really talented veterinarians, and also had a talented mentor, leader, Dr. Don Jansen. And he really encouraged me to explore a different side of myself, and that's the leadership side and what veterinarians can contribute to an organization. So over time, I moved up in my positions, and then when he retired, I took his position as a chief animal health officer for the organization, and I oversaw both veterinary teams at the zoo and the safari park and the nutrition team. You already know I have a connection to nutrition, so it was a natural fit. And then so I was in that role for about 5 years, and then during the pandemic, the world changed. It changed all of us, hopefully a little bit for the better, a lot for the better, and it made me realize that I had one more shift to make in my career, and fortunately, it coincided with a shift that our new CEO was wanting to make, and that was to bridge the health community and wildlife health communities, bring them a little bit closer. And so we did that very strategically with a new position for our organization, and that's the role I have now, Chief Conservation and Wildlife Health Officer. And we merged our wildlife health team, which is about 100 folks, and our conservation scientists, which are about 160. And we're now one big department. And this happened in September of 2020. And we are, we're merging, having a lot of fun, learning a lot. It hasn't all been flawless, but it has been exciting, and it's been great to envision a different way to do our work together.
So what is you've got this new merged group, and you've got I gather, a broader focus on animal-human interaction in the wild. How is that playing out, and what are the plans for it?
Thanks for that question. So the merging of our two teams really embodies the One Health concept, that interconnectedness of the health of people, wildlife, and the environment, and to the health of our planet. And so bringing in the expertise of our conservation scientists and exposing them to the world of wildlife health and vice versa is where it starts, because they approach problems very from different perspectives. And before we can go and enact that out in the world, we have to practice that internally. And it's historically there's sometimes conflict or not inability to see other perspectives in certain professions, and so especially with biologists and veterinarians in the field, there's some historical tension there. So yeah, we just wanted to break the model and throw all the puzzle pieces up in the air and start over. So that's what we do with the departments, and then we also did that in some ways with our conservation programs. So we have about 130 projects in 60 countries around the world, which is fantastic. However, it's really hard to communicate how 130 projects are having global impact, because it's a lot of sprawl, and it's really hard to tell a single story that connects those projects. So we reorganized or reframed our conservation programs into 8 conservation hubs around the world. And we chose the hubs based on the areas where we're already invested and the species where we had deep expertise and skills and existing partnerships in country, and now have identified leaders within our organization for each of those hubs. Now have that very, very important task of we call it weaving the sweater out of these projects in a region that were independent, now pulling them together to make something that's going to have greater impact globally. And there will be some that fall out as a result. There may be some we pull in. And the directives that we've given the various hubs is we definitely are a biodiversity conservation organization. It's biodiversity of species and genes. And it's also, we work with people. Conservation is about people, and we work with communities. And we also need to think about habitat and the landscape, and that's not our skill set. And so that's one of those very key areas where we want to partner with organizations that bring that skill set to the table. So we have that, again, that One Health triad, and really trying to create that magic within the hub that checks all of those boxes.
Okay.
So now, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, you did this merger in the middle of the pandemic. And so I'd like to have you tell us a little bit of how things were going at the time, how it affected procedures with people and animals and so forth.
Yeah. So, wow, we've all been through so much. And if you wind the clock back to, I think March 13th is when things really closed down in this area. I remember sitting in a room thinking, well, is this 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months? Oh, for sure, we closed the zoo, of course. And, we're trying to plan our reopening. Is it going to be June 1? Is it going to be Memorial Day or Labor Day? And so anyway, we had to cut back like everybody. Our significant, our facilities are based on revenue from the gate. And we bring in a lot of revenue and we have a lot of expenses. And we had no money coming in for 5 months. We really cut back on procedures with animals, no elective procedures. We did emergencies. We reduced staffing. We did not cut food expenses, of course, and we certainly didn't withhold care or not provide care. But we we really had to split our teams. I think the main motivation for the reduced activity is we split our teams so that they didn't overlap at work. And because we needed to reduce the number of people in the workplace, the number of people in shared spaces. And, as a result of that, we had less work going on. When we reopened in June, it was fantastic, for most of us, especially our finance department. But what we realized is our frontline employees were really stressed. And, many of them did not come back to work. It was a risk they did not want to take. And we took all kinds of precautions. I mean, there's so much plexiglass around our facilities now. It's like anywhere where there's barriers. We practice physical distancing throughout the parks. We keep guests at a certain distance away from animal areas. We do, again, where everyone's face masks are, all those precautions. And then we were feeling really, really good about things towards the end of the year. And then, that second wave of COVID came, and San Diego County, really, the cases were skyrocketing. And so the governor closed all zoos again in December, which spring break and Christmas is where we make the majority of our money for the entire year. So we were closed for spring break, and then we were closed for Christmas. And we stayed closed until mid-January. But we've been doing great ever since, and feeling good about things.
So when you talk about some of the precautions that you were taking, do you focus on trying to protect transmission from people to the animals, from animals to people, or between guests? I guess what are you mostly focused on there?
Well, we focus on all of it. And until our gorillas, we considered our animals as completely protected. And so the barrier was our workforce. And we made sure that our animal care professionals wore face masks, even if they're working by themselves with the animals, just to not transmit. We know enough about COVID to know that many species were susceptible. We assumed great apes were highly susceptible. So, we had all these precautions in place. We definitely protect our staff from each other. We protect our guests from our staff from our guests from our guests, guests from our animals, it was just, if you could just imagine the number of meetings about different things that we never thought of a year ago. It's been quite a year.
Go ahead now and tell us about the gorilla story. How did it start up? What was your first inkling and so forth?
Yeah. So, brand new year. We were so excited to be, coming back to work. We actually, many of us took a couple of weeks off at the end of December. Again, we were closed, really hurting financially, trying to burn down some AL. But then everyone's eager to come back to that new year, refreshed, thinking about goals, 2021, where am I going on vacation? And we knew the zoo was going to be opening. It was just a matter of a week or two. And then we had one of our wildlife care specialists who work with the gorillas felt funny at work one day. I think she had a backache or something and left immediately, got tested, and it came back positive. So no respiratory signs or anything. And the same day, or perhaps the next day, we got that positive test result from the staff member. A gorilla coughed, and it was like, it was amazing. It just, everybody sprung into action. Now, we couldn't really do anything officially, but we had to assume the worst, hope for the best. Immediately started collecting samples from each individual. These are fecal samples to do the SARS-CoV-2 PCR. We got the test results from our local lab or our state lab on a Friday. Those were not official results, so we were not allowed to announce anything or do anything until we got the confirmatory testing on Monday. So that was like the worst weekend I've had in a really long time. And we spent the whole weekend on Zoom coordinating our press release with our state agencies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, USDA, CDC. We all wanted to coordinate because this was going to be big news. I mean, again, we assumed gorillas were susceptible, and we assumed it wouldn't be our gorilla. And so, that was one whole aspect of it. The whole other aspect was we had to bring in we had a wonderful county health department that came in and reviewed our PPE protocols. And, we were really upset with how could this possibly happen? We thought we were perfect. We thought we had everything covered. And, lessons learned, we're now, 9-10 months into a pandemic. Well, people get complacent, right? And it was also in San Diego, we normally have fantastic weather, but sometimes it rains and sometimes it's cold. And right in early January, it was rainy and cold. So doors are closed. Normally, a lot of doors are open around here. Doors are closed. You have gorillas in an indoor building, some hosing going on. I mean, you could just imagine that there's a lot of ways that the air could get contaminated, or there could be droplets contaminating items in the room or inhaled. So we got the positive and took off from there.
This is one gorilla.
When you're looking at these test results, did you? I don't even know the extent to which this is practical based on gorilla behavior. Did you separate the gorillas, or was there any kind of was there anything you could do there to try and stop the spread among them?
Yeah. So this is like I'm having flashbacks here. We had many meetings about that, many conversations, because that's the immediate. But there's a huge welfare component to separating a social group, and our attitude was, well, they're all positive. They're just one big gorilla. That they're in for space. They sleep with each other. They're never not physical. So they all had exposure, and we assumed that they were positive. And they ranged in age. I think the youngest is 2, maybe 4 years old. Oldest is 49. And so we had that range of susceptible animals. And we certainly didn't want to stress them by separating them. And so once we got our results back, we submitted samples on all of them, but they only confirmed tested 3 based on the viral load in the sample. So that's why sometimes you get different numbers reported by the various folks, but we could only say it was confirmed because that's the official confirmed. Those are the only results we have from the confirmatory lab. And even though we continue to do more testing internally, because we also have a molecular lab, those aren't official results, so we don't. So anyway, all of the animals showed various symptoms over the next couple of weeks. And, the weird part, it was never consistent. It was this animal coughed or that animal coughed, or now this one's congested and now he's not, and this one's not eating. Now, and it was just all over the place. And our team did an incredible job of keeping track of all the different signs each animal was having, how they were eating, how they were drinking, what their poop looked like, and all those things. But we definitely had 2 older animals. The oldest, the silverback, was 49, and another female who I think's in her late 30s, close to 40. We knew they were on our radar of being very concerned about the impact the virus might have on them.
Now, you said at the start a gorilla coughed, so I presume that's unusual, right? And was it just one or many coughs?
Well, it's not unusual, especially in the winter. They are highly susceptible to all human respiratory viruses, and so much so that they're vaccinated with human influenza virus. They also get, at least our bonobos get the RSV vaccine. Coughing's not unusual. Coughing during a pandemic within a few days of a keeper being positive for COVID-19, different ballgame.
Did you see any cases or any positives in any primates other than the gorillas?
So we are not allowed to just randomly test animals. We have to get approval from the state veterinarian. Resources are limited. Getting tests, getting supplies, all that was regulated, and veterinarians, I don't know if it's still the case, but didn't have free access to even N95 masks like we normally do, because those things were being diverted to the human supply chain, which they should be. So the COVID testing is regulated, and you have to have approval. And to get approval, you have to have reasonable suspicion. So we're not able to do surveillance in our collection.
And after, how long did it take before the gorillas appeared to be free of symptoms?
3 weeks. But they did shed the virus much longer than that, and that's true for people as well.
As measured by PCR,
so go ahead.
Yeah, so shedding virus, you mean measuring PCR, which could be that they're no longer shedding infectious virus.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Just
like with people.
When this, when we heard of this, there was a press release released by your alliance, I believe, and we talked about it on TWiV, and we were wondering why you did fecal samples as opposed to nasopharyngeal swabs. I think it's probably obvious, but why don't you tell us?
Well, yeah. So we didn't train the gorillas for that procedure. Okay. We could get one sample. I don't believe they would voluntarily come back for an.
Okay.
So, we got our original positives with a very simple sample. So we opted to go with that. We did discuss different things. We could give them some browse branch to chew on, take the branch, swab the branch for the saliva. We had great intentions to do all kinds of, mini projects, but we were just overwhelmed with the reality of what we were dealing with. We had to, again, protect our keepers, and we had a breach in our biosecurity. So we had to really amp that up, really change a lot of practices. We had animals with clinical signs. We have a media storm going on. We have just a lot of things happening all at once. Oh, and then we reopened the zoo in the middle of it. And so there was that whole influx of, are the guests going to get COVID because the gorillas had COVID, and should we close the exhibit, and when should we open it? And there's just so much going on. We should write a book about it, but I don't know if I really want to relive it.
What kinds of supportive care did you do in those 3 weeks? And were there any points where you thought that you needed to do something more extreme or?
Yeah, that was the case right away for the silverback. So 49-year-old animal, near end of lifespan, with a history of maybe some mild cardiac changes, and heart disease is extremely common in geriatric great apes. So we started consulting with our colleagues in the human field, and we had a lot of COVID experts, fortunately, in San Diego County. And really the reality was you have that window, those first 5 days after clinical signs, to have an impact on case outcome. And so we decided that we would rather anesthetize a stable animal and get the data we needed to best manage him than to wait for him to decline and then try to intervene at that point. So we were, he was eating and drinking okay, not great. He was lethargic. Under anesthesia, we did a chest CT, echocardiogram. He had severe pneumonia, and he had a life-threatening arrhythmia, which may be. And so we were really glad that we did the procedure. When we did, we were able to give him some IV fluids, IV antibiotics, and we also had the foresight to get our hands on some monoclonal antibodies. And so we treated him with that. Now that was very controversial with our human advisors. Some were really pushing that 5 to 10 day clinical window of when they're effective. Others were not supportive of that. There's just a lot of conflicting information coming at us left and right. A lot of people trying to give us monoclonal antibodies to use, but we didn't take them. We went back to the drug trials and took research, what was left over from a research trial, not from what's in hospitals locally. And we had to wait a couple of days to get it. Anyway, he did get those monoclonal antibodies, and we believe they saved his life. But we'll not be able to prove that.
That's a subject we've discussed repeatedly on TWiV, as you may know as well, the whole thing around monoclonals. But yeah, that was probably a good call.
And he got human monoclonals, right? Which wouldn't be if you could, you'd give him a great ape monoclonal, I guess, but we don't have any of those.
No, he's 98% human anyway, right?
Yeah.
So we're pretty happy with that response that we got. I'll also just continue a little bit on him. He recently got a loop recorder implanted. So he's now, we did a recheck, chest CT, pneumonia has resolved. His arrhythmia is much, much, much improved, only a few PVCs. He is on cardiac medication. And again, we do get those recordings every day and are able to manage him quite well.
So then tell us also about the clinical trial with some other primates and the vaccine.
Yeah, so it's just a weird coincidence. All these things happen simultaneously. But in the end of the year, I had a colleague of mine introduce me to a gentleman at Zoetis who was looking for zoos that might be interested in trialing the vaccine. It was right before the holidays. I was like, we had a Zoom meeting. I learned a little bit about it. I thought, great, I'll just file that one away, have a nice holiday. And then, of course, I called him right back first day of the year, like, I need that. He's like, oh, it's not going to be ready until May. And, but let me see if I could find something they just completed a toxicology study. Let me see if there's anything left over. So again, he found 26 doses remaining from a trial, and that was enough for 13 individuals. So we have 2 facilities, the safari park and the zoo. And, you want to love your children equally. So the safari park only has the gorillas, so only just that one group of great apes. The zoo has gorillas, orangutans, and bonobos. So while we were entrenched in treating, 8 gorillas with potentially severe disease, we had the other zoo saying, what about us? How are you going to prevent it in our gorillas? So, we opted to use the vaccine on, of course, those animals because they were in similar situations with indoor facilities that, may not have the best ventilation. And so we protected them. We did not vaccinate them all at once. That's poor form for a veterinarian with a new drug and a new species. So we vaccinated them over a couple months, and we got all 13 animals protected with 2 doses. We've had, I believe, 2 animals maybe rubbed their arms afterwards, and 1 animal held her head. But these only were seen after the first injection. They did not have apparent signs after the booster, which is not my experience with the vaccine.
So you said that they were protected after getting the vaccine. Were you able to do things like measure immune responses?
Yeah, I said protected. That would be an overstatement. We do have, I'm looking at have some notes here. We did test 1 individual orangutan between the first and second dose, and she did not have antibody response at that venture. Hopefully she will down the road. On one of the bonobos, we were able to voluntarily collect a blood sample 12 days after the second vaccine, and he had a low titer of 1 to 32. So it's still considered protective, I think, but not those higher titers that they're seeing in people. but we will continue to obtain samples opportunistically and look at those titers, see what we can learn from them. I know there's other zoos now that are interested in the vaccine, and there are many great apes in zoos that are cooperate with voluntary blood draws. So we will be able to, over time, collect that data.
So the apes volunteer for the blood draw.
They raise their hand.
Take mine. That's great.
Yeah, actually, they have a sleeve. It's a metal sleeve that you put over their arm, and that covers their hand. And then there's an opening here where you can safely inject. But then,
is that something they're used to, or is it really surprising to them?
Oh no, they're trained. They're acclimated and trained to it. So they're, great apes are incredible to work with and easy to train using high value food items, and sometimes different fruit juices are very attractive to them, and they love that relationship with the folks that care for them. They want the attention. We can do a complete physical exam. Not complete physical exam, but a complete visual exam. All animals will open their mouths. We can regularly look at their teeth. A lot of them, we can get temperatures on them. Some, we're working towards training for blood pressure measurements. Some are trained to get their standing echocardiogram. So there's a lot of incredible work that zoos are doing with great apes to help manage their care, take the best care of them that we can.
That trick with high value food items works well for students in human schools as well.
I want to go back just a little bit. When you and I talked before, it sounded like the vaccine was a subunit vaccine with an adjuvant, making it a lot like the Novavax vaccine for people. And I remembered you said something like that Zoetis had maybe originally was developing it for cats and dogs, but then that wasn't going to play out or something. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I think because of what was happening in the mink industry, that became more of a commercial need than in pets right now. That may change in the future, but they wanted to target the mink industry, and there was an urgency to get that vaccine out. I think it was related to their breeding season and needing to protect those animals. So it was made for that, but it's been used on dogs, cats, mink, now gorillas, but it was also tested on macaques.
Uh-huh. And then you said that originally he had said, "Oh, we're not going to have anything until May." So is that bolus of things for May already spoken for with respect to minks, or do you think it'll become more widely available for zoos and primates?
So the reason he contacted me was to reserve some of that supply for zoos. So I learned just a little bit about Zoetis, a great veterinary company that, of course, like many companies, uses primates in research, and they really want to give back. They really want to help the wildlife conservation community and zoos to take care of their animals and do some outreach. And they're very much focused on emerging infectious diseases, and we know the links between human and animals. And again, it's just that way for the company to to really do their part for global health.
I don't know if you know this, but can you give us an idea of how a vaccine for, non-human primates, mink, et cetera, how it would be tested compared to human vaccines? Because, we're always saying it's less stringent, but you should know better.
Well, I'll just say I don't really know that much about it, but I'll give it a try. So the vaccines are basically the same. They're licensed for the species that they're tested on. And so that's where it becomes a mink vaccine or a dog or cat vaccine. It's where was the money spent on the research animal that did the toxicology studies and did the the antibody, the response to vaccination. And that's where that labeling comes in. But at least my understanding of this is a purified recombinant spike protein with that proprietary adjuvant. They're not going to make a vaccine for gorillas. They're not going to make a vaccine for lions. They're not going to make a vaccine for white-tailed deer. So, and that's okay. Veterinarians are, especially zoo veterinarians, this is our world, right? There's no amoxicillin made specifically for giraffe. Not that we would give a giraffe amoxicillin, but we use extra label drug use. There are rules and regulations around this. Where it got a little different with the Zoetis product is it had not yet been approved, so there was no extra label drug use allowed, or not allowed, but there was no designation because extra label is only if the drug's approved in another species. This wasn't approved in any species yet. That's what's going to happen, later in the spring. So I don't know if that is.
Yeah, and also I assume there's no efficacy testing in animals either, right?
Well, in the species that they label the vaccine for, yeah. Mm-hmm.
If something turned out to be not very effective, then it would not be licensed, probably.
Correct.
How would they do that? I mean, they would just vaccinate. They would have a control group and a vaccinated group and see who gets infected or gets disease, I guess, just like human trials.
Yeah, they do challenge studies.
Challenge, okay.
So what are some of the other viral infection concerns that you have for animals? I remember you said something to me about if vets had been in charge, there wouldn't have been a pandemic, and it kind of feeds into that.
How many people are going to hear that? But it's so well, that's because, we would test in quarantine. Well, number one, we wouldn't move an animal from one country to another without testing it on the front end and testing it when it arrived in the new country, and we wouldn't not quarantine it. So right there is the basic principle of that's broken. And, I'm not suggesting that we regulate people to that degree, but it is an interesting concept to think about. So, from other diseases of significance, we kind of the most interesting one, I think, is West Nile virus. So birds, especially in zoos, have been severely impacted by West Nile virus. And my own experiences have been with thick-billed parrots, one of my favorite birds, that the captive population in zoos in the U.S. was really decimated by that virus when it first came through. And we use a vaccine made for horses, for parrots, and it works. And that has really significantly reduced mortality in thick-billed parrots in zoo collections. So we have practice with preparing for other zoonotic diseases like avian influenza. We have a huge protocol to kind of prevent it from coming into our facility, and then to manage it once it gets if it got in our facilities. These are things you have to prepare for in advance. You have to have an emergency response for. We've had a lot of practice because of virulent Newcastle's disease. We've had, outbreak. Actually, had an outbreak that lasted almost 2 years, and it ended like a few weeks before the pandemic started. So we've been under these restrictions of movement in our region because of virulent Newcastle's disease for quite a while, and those were lifted, and then COVID came, and it was like, VND was child's play compared to COVID, and avian influenza could be significantly worse just because of how it's spread.
Are there concerns about? I guess it doesn't seem like it would be very likely, but there have been human cases of some avian influenzas, and then are you concerned about that, going back to the animals, or is it more just a concern from other birds and things like that?
Oh, we're concerned about all transmission routes. And so that's why we work we develop protocols in advance because you have to consider all avenues and you have to do your best to prevent that transmission event from occurring.
So I don't know if you have this at San Diego, but many zoos have petting zoos where little kids can get near. Does that drive you crazy because you worry?
Oh yeah, it does. But we do regular health screens on our goats that are in the pack, and we really stress hand hygiene. And we have folks wash their hands on their way in because we want to protect our goats. They should wash their hands on their way out. And we take it so seriously that we actually have someone that monitors that activity. And if there's one thing that we can, stress to children, it's to wash their hands after they play with animals. And so that's a good message, and that's a good way to make it happen. Now, the animals themselves aren't dirty or diseased. It's just that hand-to-mouth activity that's the concern.
Mm. Are there any, if this Zoetis vaccine becomes available in large quantities, would you consider other animals for vaccination in the zoo?
Yeah, we have our order on reserve. It's kind of an interesting question because in January when this happened, we were in that second wave. The B117 strain had, just started hitting in California. There was another strain in California, I think 1269, or I can't remember the number, that came from the Bay Area that was now in San Diego County that was supposed to be more contagious than some other strains. There was a lot swirling around, and we had, a keeper with PPE transmit to an animal. So like what was going on in my head is, yes, vaccinate everything. But, taking a step back as we get herd immunity in our community, maybe vaccinating everything isn't necessary. We have a different line of defense, but at the same time, those animals are part of our community. And because the disease can go from people to animals and animals to people, it makes sense if you can and not do any harm, perhaps you should consider vaccinating the animals. And I know our wildlife care specialists are interested in vaccinating lions, tigers. We have a lot of mustelids, mink family type procyonids that look like, based on the research data, that they are going to be susceptible to the virus. So, we want to do what we can. It's not practical for us to vaccinate every susceptible animal. First you have to get your hands on them, and then you have to get your hands on them again. And that adds considerable stress to the animal. And so you have to weigh all these factors.
And presumably you would just do the mammals, right?
Correct.
So you don't have to worry about snakes and frogs and whatever.
Yeah, no, snakes get their own coronavirus, as do birds. But to my knowledge, those haven't yet.
Yeah.
Do you have any bats?
We have fruit bats.
Okay.
And would you wouldn't plan to immunize those, I presume, right?
I don't know. We may be sampling some samples in our in-house lab unofficially.
So I know that in the past you've had research of your own in Kenya and northern Mexico. I'm assuming that maybe that's been on hold, but could you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, so I don't do research per se. I'm a veterinarian, and I do a lot of collection of samples and screening of populations, as well as capacity building and capacity enhancement of in-country veterinarians and others who work or are interested in the health of animals. So I've been working in northern Kenya with many other folks in our organization since 2016, and we've been supporting an elephant sanctuary. It's actually the first elephant sanctuary run by a community in all of Africa. And so we help to develop their clinical laboratory by raising funds to bring in a microscope centrifuge. Our clinical lab associate director has been working with the team in Kenya and trained them to do complete blood counts, do urinalyses. We check for parasites. They do that, right in the middle of nowhere in northern Kenya because they don't have the access to any facilities. And we want their veterinarians to have the tools they need to provide the best health for the elephants. And to do that, you need diagnostics. So that's one area. We worked with their staff and our staff have worked very closely together, those that work with elephants, on some training techniques. Our teams go to northern Kenya. Our colleagues in Kenya have been to San Diego, I think 3 times already, stopped in 2020. But what we've been doing since is meeting over Zoom. And it's difficult. There's a 10-hour time change, so it's never a good time. And but we're really trying to keep that connection alive and talk about they raise baby elephants that have been abandoned or have lost their mothers. And so there's a lot of conversations about milk formula and monitoring animals as they go through. So that's some of the work with the elephant sanctuary. We're also doing a behavioral study before and after release from the sanctuary to look at the social dynamics of the elephants and help us make decisions about which elephants to release together. And then we follow them afterwards they have satellite collars on. We also have a trail camera grid set up and at key watering points and kind of keep track of what happens after they're released. So that's that project. And then I worked with thick-billed parrots in northern Mexico with someone who you might know, Dr. Simon Anthony. We worked together for a long time, spent a lot of time in the mountains together. And we have a really nice sample set from those parrots that, Simon, any day now, need to look at samples. So hopefully one day we'll learn more about the parrots. My main interest is in the flaviviruses, and we know they're susceptible in zoo populations. And Simon and I tracked mosquitoes many years ago and did with a mobile PCR lab did find not West Nile virus, but a flavivirus in a dead parrot chick that we have suspicions that population could be vulnerable or has been exposed to another flavivirus that could infer cross protection. So lots to learn there.
Cool.
Nadine, do you get to touch animals anymore?
I have a cat at home. And yes, I do. Not as often as I like, but with zoo animals, they're not always like it when you touch them, or not me anyway. I know those folks that work more closely with them in nice ways. But as veterinarians, my joy in animals is watching them be healthy and not have to touch them. Just having them, be behaviorally, emotionally, physically in a good place.
Yeah. All right. Our guest today from the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, Nadine Lamberski. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for hosting me.
Yep.
The episode that you did with Daniel at the zoo is a really cool one, and that's one where you had a video. I remember watching that, and
yeah, it was fun.
Birds tracking all around you, and it was
fun. And the director, whose name is escaping me, he was in the penguin area, and there was a lady who feeds the animals, and she was feeding the birds so they would stay near him for the video. She had a bucket of fish and she was throwing them, so they were pecking around his feet. It made it look good, It's just so funny.
High value food items, yes.
Right.
But he, we sat in the lab and recorded later, and they have a regular lab where they mostly look at sections, and they have a huge storage area. He said, if you ever want to study West Nile, the outbreak in the beginning, all the samples are here because that's where it began, right? In the zoo. And we walked through the pathology lab and they're dissecting a bird, on the table. Because, that's the sort of thing I meant to Nadine. Do you still do veterinary stuff? But I guess not at that position anymore. I didn't mean just pet animals,
Sure.
But yeah, that was fun. Right. It was fun. Yeah. And he said we could go back. He's the head of the whole, what is it, the New York City Wildlife Conservancy, something like that. All the zoos, including Coney Island. He said, come and we'll look at the dolphins and all that. We never did, but it's cool. Yeah. It's a lot of zoos are cool.
Brand's up for that one.
I'm up for that. That sounds fun.
that does sound fun.
Yeah, that was good. I enjoyed that. And the funny thing, we got there early and we're standing on the street right outside the zoo waiting to go in. And Dixon and Dan are going to a deli to have breakfast, It's like, and we're, come on, guys. And Dixon comes out chomping on an egg sandwich, I'm hungry. That was fun. Thank you for taking care of that, Kathy.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Now, did you lose track of her over the years or did you follow her?
No, I had kind of lost track until I saw her in that zoo news and then reconnected then. And then when there was this thing going on with the gorillas, the first news reports didn't include Nadine's name. And so I wasn't even sure that it involved her. And I emailed her and I didn't hear back. And then when the vaccine thing came out, her name was in it. And so I emailed her again and she said, oh, yeah. I mean, you can just imagine she's been just, receiving a huge onslaught of emails. So somehow I was able to get through.
I thought it was very interesting that she said this mentor of hers who had her position before, he saw in her leadership potential, obviously, right, which not everyone has. And nurtured her. And I was just wondering, did you see when she was in your labs, that sort of thing?
Well, the lab was just starting out and her task was mostly to be our undergraduate dishwasher. So it's
hard to see.
Hard to spot at that point, yes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and once we figured out that they were going to be pretty careful at autoclaving and dishwashing, then we'd have them make solutions and, start to do some kinds of simple things. So, and then I knew she was going to vet school and I did lose track of her for a while. So, yeah.
Cool. Good stuff. Yeah. I could see getting tired of the cats and the dogs and the chickens, and the horses. I had a friend in college who wanted to be a vet and he used to work summers for a vet. And he said one day they brought an elephant into the office, a baby elephant. Can you imagine? It was very small. Yeah. The guy walked it in with a rope. It was sick. Oh, boy.
That's a sneeze you don't want to be in front of.
Right.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to give a gorilla a vaccination. Boom.
Right. Not very carefully. Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah. The thing that always amazes me about vets is, and the question about how do you compartmentalize or understand these different animals. That's always been the thing that it's just incredible that if you think about what human doctors go through in medical school and they're just learning one species.
Right, exactly.
And veterinarians are going to treat, something with nucleated blood cells and then turn around as something that's an herbivore. And she's talking about, things that have foreguts versus, wow. Yeah, that's a lot to handle.
Yeah, it's hard, and you can't talk to them, right?
No, right. You can't get symptoms.
So I think that's what attracts a lot of people, that they can't talk. They don't have to deal with that. But
malpractice insurance might be low. Although I guess depending on the type of veterinary medicine you practice, if you're a racehorse vet and you screw up, that could be tricky.
And that's the thing. There are a lot of things you can do. You could do racehorses. You can do farms, right? Cows and horses, which is a big deal. My wife is always watching these. There's a guy who has a TV show, an old guy, and he goes to different farms and he takes care of the animals. There's a cow lying there. And then the next thing it's up and running, whatever he's done. It's really interesting. Cows, horses, goats, sheep. Fascinating stuff. There was one, and then there's a woman who has her own show, and she goes and helps to castrate the cows. And she said, "This is going to be a long day today." They don't actually they put something around, but they put the cow in this thing and it's kicking, and then they let it out. Man, I could just not do that. I'm sorry. I have great respect for people that they must love animals to want to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, the episode we did from the Tufts Veterinary School, we're interacting with a lot of those folks in the facilities.
Oh, that was cool.
Oh,
that's
and that's
right.
our racehorse hospital over there, and
yeah. Then they brought us to the place where they rescue birds that get hit by cars, right? And remember the one, what was it, a goose that had adapted to people and wouldn't go away?
On people.
It imprinted.
Yes. Yeah.
And it wouldn't go away. Like they would try and release it and would turn back. And
it would turn around and follow the people back because they thought it was a person.
So they were trying to figure out what to do with that. Yeah, very cool stuff. Okay, let's do some email here. Alan, can you take that first one, please?
Sure. Lib writes, "Hello, TWiV team. Lib, the biostatistician here, writing from a sunny but cool 47-degree Fahrenheit Chicago. I'm half vaxxed, Moderna, and excited to chime in about person days. I'm sure you'll be hearing from several people about this, but as a recent TA for Intro to Epidemiology and someone who's calculated person days for SARS-CoV-2 papers, it's all fresh in my mind. Hopefully I can clear some things up. First off, if we had a study with 500 people that you followed for 500 days, we can express the observed number of events in however many person days we want. Because just as Amy said, these types of outcomes are rates, and person days are a unit used when expressing a rate. Specifically, it's the denominator of a rate, and it's the number of persons multiplied by days. So modifying the example for easier math, let's say we followed 100 people for 100 days and observed 20 events. We'd say the observed rate of the event in our sample was 20 per 100 times 100 person days, or 20 out of 10,000 person days. But we don't have to express it out of 10,000 person days because it's a rate, or in other words, a ratio. Instead, we might more naturally say the observed rate is 2 out of 1,000 person days, or 0.2 out of 100. I'd personally use the last one as it's the most intuitive for expressing the risk for the individual. If you were followed for 100 days, like the people in the study were, you would have a 20% chance of being positive, as 20 out of 100 were. Now, you might be thinking, why don't you just say the rate is 20 per 100 followed for 100 days? Here's where it gets fun. First off, in the real world, you won't get the full 100 days for every person in the study. Human research is complicated. People withdraw or are simply lost to follow-up, so the amount of time each person adds to the study will vary a great deal. By adding up the total days followed across each person, we take into account that variability. But even if you did manage to perfectly follow all 100 people for 100 days, there's another important thing to consider. When talking about an infectious disease, once someone has an event, we usually no longer consider them at risk for having the event again, aka getting a new infection, at least within the amount of time the study is considering. This is important because the rate we want is the one that only applies to a population at risk of experiencing that event. If we're talking about the event of death, that's even more clear. As Amy also said, people only die once. So usually when calculating person days, we censor an individual at the time they had their event. This means if a person joined the study and had the event on day 1, they would add only 1 person day to the study, as well as 1 event. Their personal rate was 1 event per 1 person day. To conclude, person days are a unit used in time to event analyses. You can then get on with creating your Kaplan-Meier curves and running your Cox proportional hazard models and the like. But in epidemiology, we usually want to know the overall rate of disease, and person days is the unit for that. Happy to chime in about any other stats epidemiology questions. P.S. Have to mention pregnancy. Yes, if you followed 100 pregnant women from the start of pregnancy until 10 months, your ultimate rate of birth would be something in the range of 1 per 10 person months, but it wouldn't be exactly that for many obvious reasons. And we would, of course, calculate the confidence interval.
All right.
Thank you, Lib.
I love this thing, half vaxxed. Isn't that great?
Yes.
Yes.
That's good.
Yes.
Someday we're going to have to use that as a title for some program.
Yes. Doing something half vaxxed. Yes.
It's great. Now, Lib, right? Yes. I think you should come on and explain Kaplan-Meier curves and Cox proportional hazard models and odds ratios, etc. Because, well, at least I can't.
Those are fun. That's why.
That's why. Yes.
Kaplan-Meier maybe, but yeah,
I like Kaplan-Meier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to do those. We still do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was
Anyway,
always
this is a
plotting.
really nice explanation of the person days.
Yes.
Thank
When
you.
I was
Very
listening to that, I thought, I think we need an expert, and
Yep.
Lib did a great job.
That's why it's there. Kathy, can you take the next one?
Tony writes, we are in the middle of World War III. We battle an invisible enemy. It's not strong or powerful on its own. It requires stupidity to get along. If you don't follow the simple rules, you are a traitor and collaborator. You are a disgrace to the whole of mankind. Be remembered for sense, not covidiot war crimes. Too harsh, you cry. No, not at all. It's not a game, you selfish fool. Thanks, Tony.
Wow, a poem after
I
all
didn't
these
know it was going to
months.
be a poem until I got to the end of the first line.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like, okay.
It's been a while since we had a poem.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tony.
Thanks.
Brianne?
Sure. Mike writes, hi, TWiV crew. It is 42 Fahrenheit and overcast in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm writing to add to the college vaccine discussion in TWiV 742. I'm a chemistry professor at one of the many Boston area colleges. We're a small school, and the pandemic has heightened that a major part of our revenue is room and dorm fees. Therefore, our administration has been pushing us to have as many students as possible taking in-person classes this past academic year. We did twice-a-week testing, masking, distancing, and a little bit of hygiene theater. My school is planning for fall 2021 to be back into normal densities of people in classes and in the dorms. I'm expecting our school and some others to require vaccinations for the fall and to use that to attract students to stay in campus housing. The message would essentially be, everyone will be vaccinated here. If you live on campus, you won't need to distance or wear a mask. I love the podcast. Thanks for all you do, Mike in Boston. Mike, I really like that messaging. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's good.
So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good approach. And if you frame it to the administration as a way to increase student intake, then they may be less worried about, if we require vaccines, we'll scare away the students, because you can actually.
Yeah, I might use that.
Yeah.
Dan writes, hello from Arlington, Virginia, where it's very warm, 84 degrees, and we are awaiting the arrival of the 17-year cicada brood. Thank you for all you have done to inform the public during the pandemic. It seems to me there are some difficult questions no one has yet answered about what life will look like during the next phase, when large swaths of the public are vaccinated, but the virus is still circulating. Specifically, I've been wondering whether fully vaccinated people can A, transmit SARS-CoV-2, and B, get long COVID. I haven't really heard anyone in the media weigh in convincingly on these questions. As you know, the CDC recently gave a confusing answer on the first only to reverse itself. For me, this has real-world applications, as my wife and I just got vaccinated, but we have 2 young kids under 16 and an elderly grandparent who is vaccinated but immunocompromised. Your thoughts on these questions and when we might know the answers would be greatly appreciated. Relatedly, curious to get your thoughts on when you expect the vaccine to be available for the 6-month to 11-year-old age group. Thanks again for all you do, Dan. Well, I think, Dan, the reason you haven't heard the media weigh in is because the people they're asking probably don't know the answers. I think there are transmission studies underway. Kathy, you sent me one about University of Colorado doing one, right?
Right. They're part of a multi-campus trial that's, it's interesting because it's students all know whether or not they're getting vaccinated or not. So it's not blind in that sense, but they're going to be sampled frequently, and if they and their contacts are going to be known and so forth, and they'll be able to really try and get at this question of transmission.
Yeah, the short answer is we don't actually know the answer to either of these questions yet. There are reports already. I haven't seen data, but I've seen individual reports of people with long COVID getting the vaccine, and it resolves some or maybe even all of their long COVID symptoms. I don't know that that's going to be a universal response, but it's certainly a darn good reason to get the shot, even if you've already had COVID. And in terms of people transmitting, I mean, the CDC is now at the stage where they are tracking so-called vaccine breakthrough events, which, by the way, TWiV has been talking about the possibility of these since back before we had a vaccine, you know, that immunity is not binary. And unsurprisingly, there are cases of people getting SARS-CoV-2 and some cases of people getting symptomatic or even severe infection, and a few deaths of people who were vaccinated and died of COVID-19. This is a very, very, very tiny subset of vaccinated people. I think we vaccinated something like 67 or something million people in the US so far. And the CDC has found the 5,000 some odd breakthrough cases.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Yep.
this is a rare thing. A lot of them are asymptomatic or minimally symptomatic, and they were only detected because they work in healthcare and they're being routinely tested.
Yep.
And hey, you're positive. Oh, wow, I hadn't expected that. And the ones where they're getting severe disease or dying are overwhelmingly people who have very complicated medical situations. You know, so it kind of all fits together into a picture that's relatively encouraging, but it's also a little warning that nothing's 100%.
Well, the vaccine efficacy is not 100%, so we expect that, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why when the China vaccine results were announced at just over 50%, they were concerned because that's a lot of people who are going to get infected. The Daniel said last week that if you have lung damage, then you do not get a benefit from vaccination. So in other words, if lung damage is part of your long COVID, the vaccine does not reverse that. It seems to reverse other aspects, but not that. And that makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So yes, we'll find out these. And what about the 6 month to 11? When will we know that? Does anyone?
I think a trial has been announced.
Yeah.
The trial has been announced. There are a few sites around. And so I know of some people who have looked into those trials for their children. And so those trials, I think, have started.
Enrolling.
Yeah, they are enrolling. But I don't think that they are particularly far. That was all rather recent.
I believe both Pfizer and Moderna have pediatric trials now. And the plan, I don't know if this is still the case, but Johnson & Johnson was planning to do 6 month and up pediatric trial. Given the current status of their vaccine, I don't know where that stands. And I don't know where things are with, say, AstraZeneca. And I haven't heard anything about Novavax in a while.
Mm-mm.
Last night, Daniel said that he was on a call yesterday about the J&J, and he said that the 25th will be the last day where people who have just recently been vaccinated will be through that window of time when these events occur, and then they will decide what they're going to do. But he seemed to think they might not use it, and he said it's not a big deal because it's so the mRNA vaccines, as Alan said, they've given out 200 million doses in the U.S. and just a few million of the J&J. So he feels, and the sense on this call was that if it's not used anymore in the U.S., it won't be a tragedy because we can make it up with the other two vaccines. So we'll see. We will see what happens. Alan, can you take the next one, please?
Sure. Monique writes, Bonjour. I grew up in Montreal and now live in Calgary, Canada. I follow your podcast weekly. The vaccination in Canada is moving very slowly, but it's happening. I am a new retired junior high school science teacher who started to volunteer at a wildlife rehab clinic. I'm in the process of getting immunized from rabies. I just received 2 out of the 3 doses. I'm getting the Rabivert vaccine. My question is, can I receive my COVID vaccine at any time during my rabies immunization journey, or do I have to wait a certain number of days/weeks before getting a Moderna or a Pfizer vaccine or AstraZeneca vaccine? Government of Canada is offering those 3 vaccines. Moderna or Pfizer or AstraZeneca, and we are dependent on other countries for vaccine supply. Vaccination is happening in phases, so people most at risk get it first. More groups are eligible as they get more doses. We receive notification when a group is eligible for vaccination. Thank you so much for keeping me engaged in learning about viruses. And my reflex here is to say, ask your doctor, or ask the vaccine clinic. I do know that they ask whether you've been vaccinated against anything else recently, and I don't know what the standard procedure is. I certainly don't know what the standard procedure is in Canada for waiting after other vaccines.
I think Daniel has said you should wait a certain amount of time after the last other vaccine, but then he also says, don't miss an opportunity to get vaccinated.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, I would say whatever the minimum is that you're required to wait from a non-COVID vaccine, you should accept that and get the first COVID vaccine you can get and get back to your rabies series when you can get back to it.
I looked up what the Rabivert one is. It's produced by GSK from the Fleury low egg passage rabies strain cultured in chicken fibroblast primary cells, and then it's inactivated and freeze-dried, lyophilized, basically. And so there's no reason that there would be any kind of contraindication relative to what the Moderna, Pfizer, or AstraZeneca or J&J vaccines are in any way, shape, or form.
You know, biologically, there's no problem with you encountering many immunogens, right?
As they do all the time.
Exactly.
Right.
So
it would only be if there was some other, to me, if there was some other licensed adenovirus vaccine that you might get, that you might not want to do that, or and
I think part of the concern also is if somebody gets a side effect from a vaccine, you'd like to maybe have some idea which vaccine caused it.
Right.
So what would you say if, say, some people, some expats got the China inactivated vaccine, and then they, a couple months ago, and then they move back to the U.S. and they sign up for a Pfizer, and they're in line, and they say to the person, yeah, I got Sinovac or whatever it is, but I want it again because I don't like Sinovac. What do you think they would do? Would they say go home?
I don't think so.
No,
they give it to
you? They'd probably go ahead and give you the shot. You haven't had a U.S. approved vaccine yet.
Yeah, they would. Okay, yeah. That's a good point. Yeah,
I think so.
Kathy, can you take the next one?
Ellen writes, post-COVID long haulers demonstrate clearly that having the disease at all can be devastating. I do wish you'd modify your statement that the vaccines prevent severe illness and death, and that's all that matters. For example, there's a link here for a Lancet paper, 6 months neurological and psychiatric outcomes in 236,379 survivors of COVID-19, a retrospective cohort study using electronic health records. Our study provides evidence for substantial neurological and psychiatric morbidity in the 6 months after COVID-19 infection. Risks were greatest in, but not limited to, patients who had severe COVID-19. This information could help in service planning and identification of research priorities. Complementary study designs, including prospective cohorts, are needed to corroborate and explain, and then it goes on. So Ellen wants us to modify the statement that the vaccines prevent severe illness and death, and that's all that matters.
But the reason we say that is because it doesn't, not because of long COVID, because we don't know actually if you could get long COVID after a mild infection after vaccination. But we say that, at least I do. What matters is preventing disease and death, not just preventing infection. That's why I say that. So I think, Ellen, you're right. Well, we don't know if the vaccine is any infection that occurs in a vaccinated person is going to lead to long COVID or not. We just don't know that.
Right? Yeah, Ellen, I would say that, personally, one of the reasons I was excited about getting vaccinated was because long COVID sounds pretty scary to me. But I have not seen any official trial data to show that the vaccines can protect against long COVID. So it's hard to officially say that, even if I might personally think about it for myself. It's not, something we can actually say with any real data behind it.
I'm unclear on whether we've actually said that preventing death and illness is all that matters. If I said that, then I apologize, because that's at least for me, preventing spread of disease is a priority. It's not the top priority, but I certainly don't want to be giving this virus to other people. And so there are other issues at play. But for combating a pandemic, the very first thing you want to do is prevent people from getting sick or dead. And so, that is the top priority.
I've probably said that because, I was talking about, the South African variant where the J&J vaccine prevented death and hospitalization, and that's what matters. That's what we are concerned about. Now, I agree that long COVID could be an issue, but we don't know. So until we know, I think that's fine. For me, I'm okay saying that, Ellen.
Okay. And are we thinking that the cases of long COVID that we might be concerned about are going to be in the breakthrough cases of somebody who's been vaccinated? I mean, is that...
Well, that would be one, right? That would be one,
right.
But also maybe you get an asymptomatic infection after being vaccinated. And so because some of those can get long COVID, right? So that could be a concern.
Right, but so it's just, it's asymptomatic, but nonetheless, it's an infection. And so if then you develop, I know, but in a way, then it's still breakthrough.
Right.
Well, I don't know. No, it's not a breakthrough because the vaccine is not going to prevent infection in a year when antibody titers are low.
We don't know that.
What?
We don't know how long it's going to prevent infection, right?
No, yeah, but I think now the studies that show preventing of infection in whatever fraction of people are somewhat artificial because antibody titers are very high soon after vaccination. So in a year, and Paul Benash said this, you have very low antibody titers, a year out after vaccination or natural infection. You get infected. It takes 2 or 3 days for antibodies and T cells to kick in. So you're going to get infected, but you're not going to get disease. So is that going to be an asymptomatic infection that might lead to COVID, or is it simply too limited that it would never? We don't know the answer to that.
We don't know.
I think that's the issue.
But I think your absolute best chance of avoiding long COVID is to get the vaccine.
Yeah. And certainly if the vaccine does prevent infection in you, even if it's just after vaccination when your antibody level is still high, that certainly is preventing you from getting long COVID if you don't ever get infected in the first place.
Sure. That's right. Yeah. Brianne, please take the next one.
Sure. Sarah writes, "Hello. I have been enjoying your podcasts for the last year plus. Charles Knirsch turned me on in my role as the director of medicine at a New England boarding school, and I have found them very informative, and the separation of clinical highlights is greatly appreciated. I would like to pose the following question to you. How would you define herd immunity for COVID in a boarding school environment with a mixed day and boarding population? Do you feel that in a closed environment that could lessen our mitigation strategies once we reach a threshold? We have approximately 70% of our students age 16 plus, and I am anxiously awaiting the drop in age for the Pfizer vaccine, and hopefully others start to follow. Thank you for all you're doing." And Sarah is an MD at O'Connor Health and Wellness Center. I think it's a good question. I think that if you have a mixed day population, then those individuals certainly are a place where your population is not really closed.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as you reach the number, at any time, whenever the room has kids in it, as long as whatever 70% or 80% are immune, then that's fine, right? But if you brought in day population of all non-immune kids, that could be a problem, right? Is that what she's asking? Or is that too simplistic?
Yeah, and I mean, we don't know what the herd immunity number is for SARS-CoV-2.
Well, we know
people
theoretically
70%, 80%, and theoretically that is probably. I mean, Tony Fauci has basically said he pulled that number out based on his knowledge, which is extensive, and he's probably right, but we don't know for sure, and I wouldn't bet the population of a boarding school on a specific number.
You'll see it when you get to it, right?
Yeah, you see it when you get to it. And the other important thing to remember about herd immunity is that it operates at the population level. So if 70% of the kids in a room have been vaccinated and one kid with SARS-CoV-2 comes in, they could spread it. If they're sitting next to the kid, to another kid who's part of that 30%, they could spread it to them, potentially spread it to the whole 30%. So it's an issue for the broader population around. And I'm not sure I would even want to apply it in this context.
I was just reading about New Mexico and how well they've done with their vaccination. And they talked about the fact that there will be pockets in the state where there's potentially already herd immunity, and there will be pockets in the state where there's going to be outbreaks. And, I bet we don't have uniform herd immunity to measles, for example.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's why we have outbreaks. Yeah.
So it's going to be hard to define it in a boarding school environment.
No, the herd immunity is based on the assumption that it's homogeneous because, in Westchester, we have a community of people who are not measles immunized. You have an outbreak there because, 10% of them are immunized. So it's and it will never be homogeneous for sure, as you say. The herd immunity is based on the R naught, right? 1 minus 1 over R naught. And that's the unmitigated R naught that you figure out at the beginning. And it's 2 to 3, so it's 50 to 70%. But yes, it's as the Supreme Court judge said, I'll tell you when I see it.
I'll know it when I see it. Right? I can't define it, but I'll know what you'll see when the country reaches herd immunity is that cases will drop off precipitously, and this pocket issue that Kathy pointed out is an excellent point. There will still be populations of people where hardly anybody's immunized. But if the virus can't get to them because the population around them is immunized, then those pockets will end up being protected. And so it's not something you can really apply on this scale, I think.
I'm wondering if it really will be a sharp drop off. I remember Rich saying something that kind of resonated with me, that we're just going to get better and better as we get more and more people vaccinated and get closer to some theoretical herd immunity. And so we just may have a more gradual drop off of cases.
I think that's right. Yeah, it'll slowly. But right now we're kind of stuck on this plateau, right?
We're stuck in a plateau.
Although it depends where you are. Some places it's going up. Some places it's going down. So I agree. I think it'll be really gradual. Yeah. Let's take this last. I'll take this last one from Abigail. Below is the original email I had sent to TWiV. To, amongst other things, ask for follow-up on Paul Offit's statement about long-term effects of vaccines. I had also emailed the Vaccine Education Center, and they promptly sent me this link below. Great resource, and I wanted to pass it along to you in case it would be of use to others. All right, so Abigail wrote first to Charlotte Moser, who is at Penn and who co-authored the little book with Paul Offit, which is basically about vaccines for parents. It answers a bunch of questions. It's really good. And actually, I have the PDF, and Paul has said, give it to anybody who wants it for free. So if you want it, let me know. All right. Hi, Abigail. Thank you for contacting us. All right. I should tell you what Abigail's original question was first. Let me tell you that. Let me scroll down here. Here we go. Abigail. Okay. Greetings. This is her original email to TWiV. As a biology instructor at a community college, I am a pandemic-driven listener who has benefited greatly from listening to your podcast. FYI, I gave my students extra credit to attend vaccine town halls. Yay. After learning so much from you, listening to episode 739 with Arturo Casadeval, I realized as a plant ecologist I had something to offer you. The UC Museum of Paleontology has a robust online education program, including Science 101, a project to help with teaching the basic process of science. They point out that science is done by testing ideas with evidence, which might be done with experiments, but also with natural experiments, comparisons, and mathematical models. Check out their interactive graphic and this excellent discussion of different ways to test ideas. Welcome to the world of ecologists and evolutionary biologists. On another note, I polled my students regarding attitudes towards vaccine and potential long-term effects of vaccines was the top concern. During episode 736, you referenced Dr. Offit's statement that long-term adverse events have all showed up within the first 6 weeks of receiving the vaccine. I would like to pass this on to my students, but I've trained them to look for peer-reviewed publications to back up scientific claims. I emailed Dr. Offit to ask for citations, but I am following both pathways. Okay. So that's what Abigail sent to us. And Abigail's at Santa Rosa Junior College. She also sent it to Charlotte Moser, who wrote the book. And in that book, it's called, hang on. Am I going to be able to find it? No. Of course, I can't find the bloody thing because I want it. But she wrote the book with Paul Offit, and this question's at end. Anyway, Charlotte responds. Charlotte is Assistant Director for the Vaccine Education Center at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, fondly known as CHOP. Not related to the show where they kick you out for cooking badly. Hi, Abigail. Thank you for contacting us. We wrote about this topic in a recent issue of Parents Pack, our newsletter for the public. Because it is a newsletter, we don't cite the sources, and as you will see, the events are all from different vaccine studies, so it is not part of a single paper. As such, I don't have an easy citation to share. Thank you very much. Vaccines and your children. Hopefully, the article will give students information about where to look for primary articles. Separating fact from fiction. Thank you very much.
Vaccines and your child, separating fact from fiction.
So that's what Abigail learned from Charlotte Moser. And I understand that. It's a summary of many different studies, most likely, so there's no, but students could, that's a good thing for students to do. Go look it up and you look up various studies and, it's not going to be any one study.
So it's really more of follow the challenge that Paul Offit and the other FDA advisory panel members did, which is go to the literature and find a study where you see a vaccine adverse event where the symptoms appeared more than 6 weeks afterward, and the upshot is you can't.
Right.
Yes, and even these latest symptoms of clotting disorders are happening soon. It's just it's just that they're very,
a few weeks.
It's just that they're very rare, and you needed millions of people to see it, which we didn't have in the clinical trials, but it's not a long term. By the way, Abigail had a PS. Last summer sometime you discussed bringing on a greater diversity of scientists to the program. I hope you pursue this avenue as my students respond very positively to seeing scientists who look like them. San Francisco State University has an excellent scientist spotlight initiative that I have used to great effect. Yeah, you can, we would like to. You can blame me if it doesn't happen because, I need help. But Kathy has gotten guests, and I appreciate that. So, and any suggestions are welcome. There are many things that it just takes time. Okay, let us do some picks of the week. Brienne, what's your pick this week?
Sure. My pick is something that was in Science. I saw it yesterday. It's officially in today's issue by John Cohen called The Dream Vaccine, which is a story that the sort of subtitle is Why Stop at Just SARS-CoV-2? Vaccines in Development Aim to Protect Against Many Coronaviruses at Once. And so this story talks about kind of the history and some ideas about making pan-coronavirus vaccines. And I really am impressed with just sort of how well all of the issues are described here and sort of covered. I thought this was really informative, and I can imagine some of the listeners who have been interested in this study or this issue would really like this article. It's also very well written. I was quite impressed with how well written it is. And there is a really beautiful graphic of Spike and that shows different parts of Spike, and that also kind of shows some of the different approaches that are being used to make some of these vaccines. And so I certainly expect that I will be using some parts of this graphic as well when I talk about this with some of my students. So I found this to be a really useful article. I could imagine some listeners really liking it.
John's a great reporter. This is unfortunately paywalled.
Is it?
Yeah. So if you go to Science, you get a login to view full text, and I'm not sure.
I
have my own door for that, but I'm not sure what the options are for
your own door.
I was surprised at that because I usually try to check, and I got access to it at home without having to log in.
And I thought that all the SARS-CoV-2 related stuff for a lot of journals is still open.
Maybe it's
access.
just through this link.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't test it.
This is all great. I just wish we had done this 5 years ago. And, the coronavirologists will tell you that no, it was very hard to get any support for this sort of initiative. It's good that a pandemic has now got it going, right?
Well, and that's actually really interesting is that the beginning of this talks about the grants that were submitted to do that. And the places where they were having trouble getting funding, and kind of talks about exactly that issue as part of this article.
Yeah, it is an excellent article. Unfortunately, the paywall is real. I just went in through the front of the magazine, and I mean they have rather generously, in terms of the bottom line, made all the research papers available that are COVID-19 related. But this is a news article, and nobody has yet figured out a sustainable way to pay for those besides this. So.
Oh, well, I apologize for that, everyone.
It's okay.
If you can get to it, it's okay. Great. Yeah.
It's a nice figure. It's very nice.
And if you can't,
really
ask somebody who can.
Ask somebody who can.
Yes.
Yeah, John listens to TWiV.
I don't know.
Yeah, he does. He wrote in earlier last year, and he said, I love TWiV. Yeah, that's what he said. Maybe he's not serious, but...
Well, anyway, John, if you're listening, great article. Thank you. And if you can get it on paywall, that'd be lovely.
Yes, very nice. Alan, what do you have for us?
I have, so this is a short news video. Last week I picked something heavy. This week it's not exactly light, but it's pretty easy to digest. This is a news video from Chesapeake Bay Media. They're the publishers of Chesapeake Bay Magazine. I grew up in Maryland, so I have some attachment to this. And I've actually been to the place that's shown in this video, Smith Island. People often, we talk about distributing vaccines in difficult environments and rural places, and we're thinking about developing countries and other extremes like that. Well, this is a place that's right in a densely populated state, but it's an island, and the only way to get there is by boat. There are a couple hundred people who live there, whose families have lived there for about 300 years. And it's a really distinct place. There's a distinctive accent of Smith Islanders, and you'll hear it in this video. The woman there talking about the outbreak they had. It's very, very distinct. And the challenges of getting the COVID-19 vaccine to them, because not everybody can easily get off the island to get it. And so they hauled a cooler full of vaccine out to Smith Island on the boat and had a little clinic there for the tiny population. Cool.
Very neat. Smith Island. Yeah. Kathy, what do you have for us?
Great place to go for crab cakes if you ever have a chance. Just get the ferry boat across and go get yourself some crab cakes.
Oh, good to know. So I picked something that is part of my daily routine. So you know that I have the astronomy picture of the day as my browser homepage, and I get something from Anu Garg that's a word a day. I've been doing that for many years. And then more recently, I've started getting these daily overviews, and they're just pictures from all different kinds of things around the world. Sometimes they're drone shots. Sometimes they're from farther up, from closer down. Unfortunately, sometimes they'll show you something that where clearly they don't have north oriented at the top of the photo, and it can be a little annoying. But so I put the link in here for how to subscribe, and then that gives you a list of all the recent ones, kind of an archive. And then I picked one that was just a little while ago, and it's a picture of tulip fields in the Netherlands. And so the top picture is when all these tulips are blooming, and there's stripes of yellow and red and orange and purple. And then down below is a time of year when they're not blooming. It looks like it's almost black and white, but it's gray and green and white. So it's kind of fun. So
This is cool.
yeah.
It's really neat.
Aerial abstracts.
Mm-hmm.
It's good stuff. My pick is Next Strain, which we have mentioned many times, but I thought required a formal picking. It's an open source project to track, pathogen evolution by genomic data. And you've probably heard of it in the context of SARS-CoV-2. They have, thousands of sequences on phylogenetic trees that you can look at. And it's just a subset of what's out there because, as they say, if we put them all on the tree, it would break the computer. So they can't do it. But they have other viruses. They have, influenza, West Nile, mumps virus, Zika virus, Ebola, and our virus, enterovirus D68. Very cool. And they have narratives, data-driven storytelling. It's very cool. 20 years of West Nile in the Americas, for example. So I think it's a lovely site. Built by a number of people, including Trevor Bedford and Emma Hodcroft, who we've talked about on the show as well, and some others. So very useful. Check it out. This
is cool.
I have 2 comments. The image that they have for seasonal influenza looks quite pleomorphic.
Yeah.
It does not look spherical nor filamentous.
Yeah, that's right. It's in between. It's somewhere in between. Yep.
And then how is this collection of sequences related to something we also hear about, which is the GISAID or GISAID?
Well, this is one
is one a subset of the other, or
I think the GISAID, was initially for flu, and then it got some other sequences added on, and I think so. There is some controversy about that. The two have somehow. I've read about some conflict between the two, so I don't actually know how they're related. They're independent, though, right?
Okay. But whether they're friendly enemies or non-friendly enemies or friendly competitors or,
Yeah, I'm not sure because I know that at some point Next Strain was complaining that GISAID wouldn't give them some sequences, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Remember that?
I remember something about this too, and I don't remember. I certainly didn't read it far enough to choose a side, nor would I necessarily. But apologies to anybody at GISAID or Next Strain who were offending with our ignorant discussion of your beef. Maybe somebody can write in and tell us what's going on.
All right, that'll do it for TWiV 745. Let's see. Oh, Daniel will get his wish, because his next update next week will be 747. He wanted the upper deck.
Right.
There you go. The show notes are at microbe.tv/TWiV. If you'd like to send us a question or comment, TWiV@microbe.tv. If you like what we do, consider supporting us. Microbe.tv/contribute. Brianne Barker is at Drew University over on Twitter. Bioprof Barker. Thank you, Brianne.
Thanks. It was great to be here.
Kathy Spindler's at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks. This is a lot of fun. And I wonder, your cat's name is Athena? Is that
My
right?
cat's name, yes.
But Athena was just all over the place while we had Nadine on.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's Athena.
She sensed the veterinarian.
Yes.
She wanted to show off for the veterinarian.
Alan Dove is at alandove.com. Alan Dove on Twitter. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. And Suki, as usual, doesn't give a damn.
She's infected with a bacteriophage.
Right.
Yes.
I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.blog. I'd like to thank the American Society for Virology and the American Society for Microbiology for their support of TWiV, and Ronald Jenkins for the music. This episode of TWiV was recorded, edited, and posted by me, Vincent Racaniello. You've been listening to This Week in Virology. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week. Another TWiV is viral.